Hokie Hangover. We are live on YouTube, youtube.com/@Hokie Hangover Podcast. We're live on X. A lot of people are already tuning in. We've been promoting this for obvious reasons. We're presented by Counts Family Pharmacy, Home Field Apparel, and Vivid Seats. We put all the links in. I mean, if you listen on audio, you know what the deals are. Put all the links in the description so you can go check those out. Guys, we're here to recap Virginia Tech's 34-27 overtime loss to Vanderbilt as a 2-score favorite on Saturday to open up the 2024 season. Nothing short of a disappointment. I mean, this is, Virginia Tech was the only team to lose outright on Saturday in Week 1 in college football as a 2-score favorite. Only team to lose outright. I think the other 57 or 58 teams, whatever it was, won. So there we go, making the worst kind of history. This is kind of what we do. So, I'm just going to open the floor. First of all, Ricky, you're recording from your dad's house in Tennessee. What's going on? You sound fantastic, even though you're not on your main mic. I just want to get that out of the way early.
Yeah, I was able to get to Tennessee to visit my dad and my grandmother for Labor Day weekend. Thankfully off tomorrow. So we'll be making the trek back to the 757 tomorrow morning, but glad that we could press record given the circumstances from this weekend. I think all three of us are pretty fired up. I know I am.
Yeah. Andrew, how about you, man?
Doing well, despite the clear sounds of sirens passing by. That was just
all the blue lights there in the curtains.
Yeah, that was. I think we're good.
Better run, Andrew.
We'll find out within the next few minutes. If we hear any knocks on the door,
don't worry, they're coming after Tyler
please,
Bowen.
Contact me.
Yeah.
But
Jesus.
All jokes aside, it's been a great weekend. Well, what was outside of the 3-hour period, a tremendous weekend in Blacksburg for the marriage of one of my close friends in this world, Captain Garland Daniel Pitter Jr., U.S. Army, and his wonderful now wife, Preston, who I knew both of them from Tech. So great to be back with the old crew. Didn't get to make the trek to Nashville because I love them that much that I would skip the game. And probably for the best, because as me and the old crew got together at Champs to watch the game, it was really the same old story as most of our game watching experiences have been, over the course of the last 10 years. So, in short, the hype bubble has popped. And here we are. Week 2, 0-1.
Week 2, 0-1. Rick, let's just open the floor to you. You wrote a really good story on settling the store. Your Substack. It's on Substack, right? Substack.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure. Okay.
RickyTheBlue.com. It's pretty simple.
RickyTheBlue.com. Easy enough. I sign up for the email alerts and see you tweet out the links, so I just click them and read them. So apologies. But anyway, RickyTheBlue.com. Go check that out. Really good story on the dud yesterday. I thought it was really well laid out. I thought it was reasonable. I thought all the questions you had about the coaching staff were reasonable. And I'm just going to cede the floor to you and let you just rip it, and we'll chime in. So, Rick, how about I'll just open the floor to you here?
All right. Well, I've been thinking about how I wanted to start this, and I think the only appropriate way for me to start this is someone that picked the Hokies to go 10-2 this year.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for building this team up all offseason. I'm sorry for buying into the hype. I'm sorry I drank the Kool-Aid. I'm sorry that I bought into what's quickly becoming a myth of returning production. And I'm sorry that I overlooked a team that's been a perennial doormat in the SEC for as long as they've been in the conference. This was an incredibly frustrating and unnecessary loss from top to bottom. When you have this kind of breakdown at essentially at all levels, you can really only look at the coaching staff. And for my biggest takeaway was that Brent Pry and his assistants did not have Virginia Tech prepared to play this weekend. They were shell-shocked, using his terminology, in the first half. They had no idea what Clark Lee was throwing at them defensively. And given all of the tape that is available on Diego Pavia from his time in the Conference USA, where he was a player of the year, all the tape available on Tim Beck and Jerry Kill, they had no idea how to slow down Diego Pavia for the first half. And we ended up down in the hole 17-0 within an hour. And I noted in my column that went out today that within that hour, all of the hope and optimism that Virginia Tech had built up from a strong second half of last season to an impressive and fun bowl victory in the Military Bowl that we were fortunate enough to attend, from what seemed to be a solid offseason, a good group of transfers coming in, that's all gone. All that hope, all that optimism, all that goodwill, all that trust, all that confidence was erased in the first half. Now, we saw them get it together a little bit in the third quarter. Virginia Tech made a run. They made this a game. They took the damn lead and then proceeded to step on themselves yet again in the fourth quarter in what I thought was quite embarrassing fashion. And unfortunately, that loss, I think, kind of bludgeoned into my head that this team is probably going to be pretty close to what they were last year. And that's pretty frustrating, considering all of the projected growth that you would expect to have after a year like that, with guys coming back and guys getting older and more experienced. The first half looked like the first 4 games of last seain, of which it seems like Tyler Bowen is contractually obligated to suck for the first quarter of the year. They just did not look prepared. They looked disinterested. They looked like they did not belong on the field. They didn't look like they wanted it. Nobody was making a play. They got no push on either side of the ball, whether it be offensive or defensive line. Kyron Drones was making some really bad decisions and some really bad throws in the first half. The few nice completions that he did have, most of them were on wide open throws. So as good as Kyron's stat line looks at the end of this, his performance overall was not that impressive. So as far as I'm concerned, this was a failure at essentially every position group on the team. The secondary struggled, specifically Mansour Delane, and we can get into that later. Yeah. The linebackers did not do a good job with their run fits. The defensive line did not do a good enough job with penetration. The offensive line never got the running game going, did not protect Kyron Drones particularly well, and Kyron Drones himself did not play a particularly good game. And you add in the special teams mistake that gave Vanderbilt another free shot at 3 points, which ended up being the difference at the end of regulation. And there are fingers to point for blame all around.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, Ricky, you just touched on really so much of it. But you know, I want to apologize to our listeners. I think over the course of the last 6 seasons since we started doing this, one thing this podcast has been consistently good for is trying to be as unbiased and unaffected by the sentiment surrounding the program one way or another, and try to call balls and strikes, right? Be truly independent in that fashion, not out to get anyone with no agenda, really just seeing the ball as it is. And football, where it's played each and every week. And I think for the first time, we really bought, we drank the Kool-Aid. We drank the Kool-Aid. And, a friend of this brought to my attention, which now in hindsight seems so obvious, how on our Vanderbilt preview, we kind of accepted as fact, as inevitability, Virginia Tech was going to not only win this game, but win it comfortably. And, in that first hour, Ricky, I, as a fan of Virginia Tech, and quite frankly, really in any aspect of my life recently, truly felt like It's just such a swift kick in the nuts.
Yeah.
It's just swift kick in the nuts. From going around telling everyone, who has ears to watch out for Virginia Tech this year, to a L to Vanderbilt in week 1, to have it happen in such a confusing fashion, right, where all those indicators that we were looking for, because again, we were being too optimistic. And again, I am sorry for that for our listeners, because you deserve better than that for us. But we were talking about things like, what do we need to see in the win to feel good? And it was things like dominant play along the offensive line. In the trenches in general, right? We wanted to believe what we assumed was guaranteed to be a massively improved defensive line. We wanted to see linebackers, a group that was, getting an A+ when it comes to tackling and run fits. And we saw quite the opposite of all those things consistently throughout, especially the first half of that football game. It comes down to preparedness. Ultimately, the job of a head coach in football is to be the CEO of a program. And when it comes to your weekly decisions, it is getting everyone in a room prepared for a football game. Every single player on the roster, every single staff member. And this looked like a team that showed up thinking they were going to walk all over these guys, and were quickly reminded that, yes, though Vanderbilt has been the doormat of the SEC for years, these are guys that are Division I football players. And in the case of Diego Pavia, a guy who's won a lot of football games at the Division I level.
Yeah.
And yes, again, and this is on us, and this is where it kills me the most, to not look at the fact that Diego Pavia, New Mexico State, and Jerry Kill, not only what they were able to accomplish last year, but how they were able to, take down a Auburn team last year, which, yes, they weren't very good, but yes, it's Auburn. And make them look unconcerned and taken by surprise, in a very similar way last year to the way that these guys did, donning the Vanderbilt black and gold on Saturday afternoon. So it's extremely disappointing. Obviously, the entire lens of the season just changes right then and there.
Yep.
No longer are we talking about going into Clemson undefeated. I don't know if anyone had the chance to watch Miami play football. Cam Ward. Maybe he alone can't solve every systematic problem that Miami's had in their program over the course of the last 2 decades, but he sure can help with the quarterback play part.
Yeah.
Ask Billy Napier about that one. Talk about another team that looked unconcerned and surprised on Saturday. Gosh. But so now you got to take it game by game. I still do believe that this roster has talent. I believe it can be an improved group over even last year. There's a lot to cover. I remain, and this is something that we also, I guess, chose to overlook heading into the season. This coaching staff has really no credentials to their name when it comes to winning actually competitive football games that are going to last 4 quarters.
Oh, we were all over that.
Yeah, simply hasn't happened yet. With the exception of Liberty in 2022, I suppose. So, party's over, bubbles popped, and here we are. I want to hear your thoughts, Michael.
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not going to apologize for anything I said on the preview. Number one, because we may not have taken Vanderbilt very seriously, but I mean, they were awful last year. Like, so awful that Clark Lee had to turn over his coaching staff on both sides of the ball, bring in basically all of New Mexico State's offensive staff, led by Tim Beck, bring in Diego Pavia, and he had to take over play calling. Clark Lee had to take over play calling on the defensive side of the ball, and they looked like it's one of these week ones, like every action has an equal opposite reaction. they looked improved, right? I'm not going to apologize for anything because nobody took Vanderbilt less seriously than Virginia Tech did, the players and the coaches on Saturday. Nobody took them less seriously than the team themselves, right? A totally unserious performance in the first half. Like the tipped ball interception is what it is, but the defense looked horrendous. It took them a quarter and a half to really wake up at all. To have Vanderbilt with that offensive line and how they've struggled offensively over the first 3 years of Clark Lee's tenure, to have them move the ball up and down the field on this Virginia Tech defense and the way that they did, to run the clock down and have that great game plan to run the clock down inside 10 seconds, and Virginia Tech just be unwilling to nut up and stop it in the first half was horrendous.
It's very
horrendous.
Paul Johnson-esque.
Yes, it was very
Shout
Paul
out to
Johnson.
Joey.
Shout out Joey Weaver.
It was very Paul Johnson-esque. Very, very, very frustrating. The most frustrating thing for me coming out of this game is that, and this is, I'm trying to react to this kind of rationally because I tweeted this earlier today. I stayed off Twitter from like a Virginia Tech standpoint after the game. I was writing, I had other stuff going on, but I was just trying to like kind of get my thoughts together for this podcast. I wanted to get everything together for this, right? And I've seen way too many week one performances like this, right? Where a team comes in, doesn't play well, loses a game where they're favored, ends up having a pretty good year. I've also seen teams come in, play incredibly well, right? On the other side, right? Kind of unexpectedly play well. Doesn't really mean too much for the rest of the year. My takeaway and my concern is that from a coaching standpoint, I don't love going into year 3, and we can talk about the adjustments, and we'll get into all that, the adjustments or lack thereof, right, in the first half. And I thought Virginia Tech made some halftime adjustments that were actually pretty good because I tweeted this too. Like at halftime, I didn't know what the adjustment was because the offensive line was playing so bad. I didn't know what the adjustment was. I was like, what, just play better? Like, I don't know. It just didn't seem like Tech had the dudes up front, which was concerning, right? It's a concern. But the bigger concern for me is for Brent Pry to come out after the game and say, yeah, we were humbled a little bit. Maybe we needed that. More than saying that Vanderbilt, threw some stuff at Tech they weren't expecting. More than anything else, that quote from Brent Pry saying, we were humbled, maybe we needed that. Going into year 3, for the first time in your tenure at Virginia Tech, you have expectations, and that's the quote you're going to give after losing outright as a 2-score favorite to the doormat of the SEC. Forget the last 3 years of Clark Lee's tenure. Vanderbilt's been a doormat in the SEC for the better part of the last half decade or more. They've been bad for a while. They've been bad, quite frankly, since Brent Pry was there as a coordinator. They've been bad.
Yeah.
They've been bad since he left with Franklin. And so for you to come out and say that we needed to be punched in the mouth and humbled a little bit, that's concerning for me. That's telling me that you don't have the guys ready to play, and they have to. Why is it that Virginia Tech has to dig themselves into a hole for a quarter or a half or lose a game outright to wake up and play well under this staff? That is a trend that is really, really troublesome to me.
Yes.
And look, I have no idea how. I have no idea how the rest of the season is going to go. I've seen some wild stuff on social media in the aftermath of the game. Look, Virginia Tech did come back in this game, right? They were down 17-0. They should never have been in that hole to begin with. They came back and took the lead, right? Offense played a lot better in the second half. I thought the defense, I understand the last couple drives were not very good, but I thought the defense really got some big stops to get Virginia Tech back into this game. There were some promising things that happened on Saturday too, and we know this team is talented, and this schedule is still very gettable. I think there's an opportunity for Virginia Tech to certainly right the ship. We'll see how the rest of the season goes. But the biggest concern I have is the coaching staff being like, yeah, we were humbled a little bit. Maybe we needed that. No, that's not how this works. Like, the time is now. I mean, what did we talk about all off season? We talked about this being like the best roster Virginia Tech's had in a long time, right?
And the best roster that they'll probably have for the next 2 years.
Because we know, and we've discussed this at length on this podcast. If you've been with us all summer, we've been talking about how this was a year where you have to capitalize, because 2025, to put it nicely, Virginia Tech's going to be very, very young. They're going to be young across the roster. Offensively, they're going to be losing all their skill talent. Defensively, they're going to be losing key players at all three levels. They're going to be very young on offense and defense in 25. It's reasonable to expect a step back. 26, we'll see. You can turn over rosters in the transfer portal, but you do that less quickly at schools like Virginia Tech versus some of the top schools in the country, right? It's just the way that it is. You're left picking out of like the second and third tier guys in the transfer portal. And that doesn't mean you don't get good players, but it means it's really hard to just like turn over an entire roster like Florida State did last year en route to winning the ACC, going undefeated. It's really hard to do that at Virginia Tech, flat out. And Pry's done a great job in the transfer portal. We know that. But this is the roster that you have to capitalize on. So to come out in the opener as a 2-score favorite against a team that I have openly said is a team I think is the worst team in the non-con, and maybe that ends up not being the case. Maybe Vanderbilt is really improved, right? Pavia is a different quarterback they haven't had. Clark Lee, I think calling the defense makes a difference. I think they showed some stuff in the first half yesterday. A lot of pre-snap coverage disguise stuff they did. It was clear that Drones was not comfortable with what he was seeing, so you have to tip your cap to them. But Virginia Tech came out in the second half, made some adjustments, and played better. But the length of time that it took for Virginia Tech to make those adjustments, coupled with the fact that Pry said after the game they needed to be humbled to kind of wake up, that's a trend that I don't like very much. And we saw it last year, where Virginia Tech had to like basically have their backs against the wall and had to win whatever it was, 5 out of the last 7 or 4 out of the last 6, whatever it was to make a bowl game. I don't love that.
Yeah.
I don't love that. So that's my takeaway from yesterday, more than like, and we'll get into the X's and O's of it, but that's more my takeaway. It's just like general discourse around the program. I think the optimism was justified, and I'm not going to apologize for the optimism. I think we had a right to be optimistic going into the year. But I think yesterday was a reminder that, like, look, this coaching staff has a trend now. Narratives form, right? This is how narratives form. We talked about it during the Fuente era. You can go on a run, and it can look really, really good. And then you can go on a run the other way, like we did last September, and look really, really bad. Like to the point where Ricky wrote a column that I think was justified at the time that looked like Virginia Tech sunk towards the bottom of the Power 5. I think that was a justifiable thing to write. And then Virginia Tech turned it around, and now we had the narrative entering the season where Virginia Tech could win 8, 9, 10 games. Calling them a fringe playoff contender in the right situation didn't seem outrageous given what they had returning and how they played the rest of the season. It's all about narratives. But now we have one developing where Pride doesn't have the team ready to play against competition that, Virginia Tech is kind of on par with. And unfortunately, I think if yesterday was any indication, Virginia Tech's on par with Vanderbilt. So we're going to find out quickly. Is that because Vanderbilt's because Vanderbilt's improved, or is that because Virginia Tech's taking a step back?
Does Vanderbilt look like an 8 or 9 win team based off what you saw on Saturday?
They play in the SEC.
Yeah,
no. I mean, no.
How many games would Vanderbilt win with Virginia Tech's schedule?
I don't know, but just based upon what I saw from Vanderbilt, they do not look like an 8 or 9 win team.
No.
And
I don't
you're telling me that Virginia Tech is comparable to what that they're at right now. So that means that Virginia Tech is going to have to play to the higher end of that to get to 8 or 9 wins because their schedule is so bad.
Mm-hmm.
There's there's very little evidence that we have right now that suggests that Virginia Tech is going to be able to get to that part of their range of outcomes. I mean, I'm pretty comfortable taking 10 wins completely off the table.
Oh
And
yeah, no, I don't. No,
I
yes,
think
no.
now, based on what we saw on Saturday, this team's ceiling might be 8 wins, like the ceiling. Like if this goes as good as it can go, they might win 8 games. And are we convinced that this is going to go as good as it can? I mean, it certainly could, right? I've done this before where Virginia Tech has absolutely stunk it up. 2019 Duke is a perfect example. And the team did rebound, and that was under the previous regime. But the team rebounded. The team made a bowl game. They came within a few plays of winning the ACC Coastal.
Yeah.
So, like, yes, the year is not over, but all of the reason for optimism before the season was all projection. It was all Kyron Jones is going to improve because he's got more experience. The receiving core is healthy and should be even better. The offensive line has another year under their belt. They should be better. The defense is mostly back as starters and should get better with another year of experience. That's all projection. Well, that projection has now been completely tainted after what I consider to be a bad performance across the board for just about every single unit. Like, I didn't see good offensive line play. I didn't see good quarterback play. I thought the receivers were fine, not great, but fine. The defensive line was fine as far as pass rush goes, but as far as running or against the run, awful. Linebackers, not good. Defensive backs, not good. Coaching, not good. So how are we supposed to believe or even project now that Virginia Tech can get to that ceiling? Which, even if the ceiling is 9 or 10 wins, what says that they can get to that point?
Yeah, agree. Well, especially with Miami and Clemson on the schedule still. Clemson looked awful, but they played Georgia, right? I mean, they looked awful.
But a lot of people look awful against Georgia, right? But did anyone watch what Syracuse did to Ohio this week?
I know.
Like,
they
Kyle
look good.
McCord lit it up. Now, I understand it's the Bobcats, but like Virginia Tech played the Commodores.
Yeah, I was going to say there are no. Yeah, Virginia Tech fans have no room to talk when you go on the road to Vanderbilt and lay an egg like that, right?
And what have we seen from Haynes King through 2 weeks?
Right.
Does anyone want to watch that game right now? No.
A running quarterback?
You can really throw it?
Who could? Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah,
no,
absolutely not. So all of a sudden, you're starting to see, as gettable as this schedule looks, it's a lot of what we saw last year, how I felt last year, in the sense that Virginia Tech's not good enough to get this schedule. Now, that could certainly change, right? We've seen this team bounce back. We've seen them pick themselves up off the floor and really turn in a really fun performance and give people reason to believe again. But it's going to take more than a win over Marshall to do that for me. And quite honestly, I'm not sure what it would take. I mean, they can get me there, but I don't know what it's going to take for me to all of a sudden believe that this team can go out and be not just 7-win competitive, but 8 or 9-win competitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, right, like, and we say this every year, the season is a collection of data points, but we had no data points other than last season.
Yeah.
We put ourselves in a position where we allowed ourselves to think, and to Mike's point, like, I apologize in a joking manner. I'm not actually here taking blame for them laying.
No, I'm taking blame. I'll absolutely fall on the sword for this one.
It's Ricky's fault. It's Ricky's
fault.
For
those people, no. For those people that have known me, I have almost always been on the pessimistic side. There have been a couple of occasions where I've been overly optimistic, and this was one of them, and it bit me in the ass, just like I should have known that it would have. Watching that performance, I can now think back in hindsight and think, dear God, Ricky, how did you not see this kind of stomachache coming? And sure as hell, that's what happened.
I believe there's a quote from one of the newer Spider-Man movies where if you expect disappointment, you'll never truly be disappointed. I think it's that cautious approach has carried us this far in life. And the moment that with Virginia Tech football, and the moment that we switch it, boom, kicked in the nuts right away. But yeah, I mean, we thought this team had genuinely did. I mean, I picked 9 wins. Ricky went and picked 10 wins. And they drank a lot of Kool-Aid there. Seeing a route to the college football playoff, that this team could possibly be great. This could be a great Virginia Tech team. That this could be a renaissance. And the only thing that it felt like a renaissance of on Saturday was the Justin Fuente era.
Yes. Yes, it did.
Long live the king. Like,
my
what are we doing?
My man, and it felt like Brad Cornelson was calling some of those plays too.
Oh,
he was
man.
great for great for content.
How many times, and we can actually kind of segue this into Kyron for a second. It seemed, and I think Doug Bowman did a good job on X kind of showing examples of this, but it seemed like Kyron was hitting the check down far too often when the check down had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a product, and I'd have to go back and look at the film of the routes downfield, but maybe that's a product of guys not getting open downfield or Kyron not trusting himself. But it felt like a lot of these throws into the end of the flat or right in front of him on a check down throw, there were 3 or 4 guys waiting for him.
Yeah.
And to me, that seems like Kyron was not confident in what he was seeing, which, again, goes back to this whole discussion of projection. Kyron should be showing signs of improvement in this area. He's had almost a full year of starting under his belt, and he's got a continuity with the coaching staff, and then he goes out there and looks completely timid and unsure against what he's seeing in the first half and for a good chunk of the second half as well, especially later in the game.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, not only are we concerned about his health, given what I guess apparently is a calf strain, which I don't know why he went back in to run it, but that's another discussion. But for me, I certainly did not see enough progress out of Kyron in this game, despite what his box score looks like, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah. We're going to get the answer to this, I think, sooner rather than later as we watch this offense play a little bit more. I think, I think the play calling was ripped. Fair or unfair, I don't know. I think we're going to find out. I think it was pretty apparent that Tyler Bowen did not trust the offensive line at all, which, that could speak to a broader problem here. We'll find out. But, I mean, Virginia Tech totally abandoned the inside run, and I understand why. The interior offensive line was horrible. I mean, we talked about
the exterior wasn't very good either. Parker Clemens
should
have gotten credited with a sack in this game.
I know, yeah. I mean, the whole offensive line was bad, but as far as like the interior run game, like the pass protection was not great with the tackles, but the inside run game was horrendous. I mean, Tech abandoned it early. Maybe they quit on it too early, but like Lath Ganem and the Moore brothers looked totally overwhelmed, which, I mean, that's not great, right? Like, not great.
Not good.
not against Vanderbilt.
And that they looked overwhelmed with, Montavious Cunningham can't even get on the field. And that's what they're looking like.
I mean, I've tried to tell you. I tried to mention that the whole offensive lineman in the portal thing. It's a catch-22, as we know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the offensive line was not great. Now I think that, and I mentioned that, the pre-snap coverage stuff. It was clear that Clark Lee threw some stuff at Virginia Tech. Brent Price said as much at halftime. He was like, "Look, they did some stuff defensively that we did not see on film. We weren't anticipating." And that's what happens when you have a guy who was one of the top defensive coordinators in college football, right, at Notre Dame, and had given those play calling duties on the defensive side of the ball to somebody else for 3 years. This is what happens when you give him an entire offseason to prepare. He's going to throw stuff at you that you haven't seen. And, we talked about this, and I think Ricky and Andrew, both of you guys brought this up on 2 separate podcasts, I think, in the offseason. I thought they were really good points about the Virginia Tech film's out there now offensively, right? Like what Kyron Drones does well, what Bashal Tootin in the running game, what they do well, the receiving core. Virginia Tech's offense caught a lot of teams by surprise in the second half of the year with some subtle changes they made in the passing game, right, to the scheme. That playbook, everything Virginia Tech does well, that was out there. And Vanderbilt had an entire offseason to prepare. You gave a great defensive mind an entire offseason to figure out a way to stop it. And that's what happened in the first half. It took Virginia Tech a while to adjust to it. I thought Drones played better in the second half. But I don't think he was trusting what he was seeing with his eyes. Now, the other thing, too, I want to mention is that I think Kyron Drones is really talented, right? I think he's a great runner. I think he's got a good arm. I think he's pretty accurate for the most part. I don't think reading a defense like 1, 2, 3, I don't think that's one of his strong suits, right? He's never a quarterback who's going to sit. He hasn't been anyway so far. A quarterback who is going to sit back there in the pocket and like go through his progressions. He's not that kind of guy. A lot of Virginia Tech's big time passing plays they've made, you see a lot of like misdirection type stuff. They run that play that's been really successful where they'll send Tootin or somebody else out in motion. They'll fake the pitch, right? And then a tight end or somebody will be running a streak down the field to be wide open. The Ali Jennings play is like prime example, right? It was a little bit of misdirection.
Complete coverage bust, yeah.
Complete coverage bust. Like Virginia Tech's like looking for coverage busts, which speaks to like how Bowen can scheme guys open, right? It's a feather in his cap. But I don't think Drones is in a position where he's very comfortable going through his progressions like 1, 2, 3. And I think in the first half you saw like he had to go through his progressions and he couldn't do it. Like they kind of had Drones in a blender. He didn't know what he was looking at. I know we were texting about that, but I just wanted to make sure to bring that up on the podcast. That like the line looked overwhelmed. I thought the coaching staff was surprised at what they saw, which is fine. You make adjustments to it, right? But Tech was already in a huge hole, so they had to play perfectly in the second half. And I thought for the most part, offensively, they did. They played really well in the second half, right? They made some adjustments, and that's good. That's good they did that. But you can't fall into a hole like that. So as far as Drones' performance, it was up and down. But I think, once again, it's like we know what he does well. And I think the second half was like it shows what he's able to do when the scheme kind of matches what the defense gives you. But man, when somebody's scheming some stuff up and Drones is actually forced to like work through his progressions, he has a really hard time doing that. So it's just something to monitor. We saw it last year, and I think that's something we may continue to see going forward. But then again, like I'm not sure how many defensive coordinators or defensive minds Virginia Tech is going to face the rest of the season that are like Clark Lee either. They're going to have a few of them. Like, got to play Clemson, Rutgers, Miami.
Duke.
Manny Diaz, Duke. Hopefully you got stuff figured out by November. But yeah, Duke. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
I mean,
I got nothing on Kyron. I'm good on.
Are we all on the same page, though? Like, I mean, had they come back and won that game in overtime, I think the general sentiment would remain about the same on this podcast right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't be as downtrodden about the future, right? Because I'm a firm believer in good teams find ways to win games. That's just a fact. That has proven itself time and time again. And Virginia Tech, as it turns out, with a lead in the fourth quarter, found a way to lose this one. And that's not a good sign that they got beat out by a team still bringing in a brand new offense and a team that's got a defensive coordinator as head coach. You know, losing in the fourth quarter in the last couple minutes with a 7-point lead is not the kind of thing we want to see out of the staff, because you know, as deep of a hole as they dug themselves in, they got out of it.
Yeah.
And not only did they get out of it, they took the damn lead. But to fall right back into the hole that you just dug in the final 2 minutes, It's not an encouraging sign. And, Chris Marv's defense did a pretty good job in the third quarter of kind of bottling up Vanderbilt, and it seemed like they really had the option game down pat. And Diego Pavia didn't really have any options to go with in the option game, and that changed completely back in the fourth quarter, late in the fourth, when Vanderbilt was able to turn it back on, and it seemed like move the ball at will. That's very discouraging for a team that was able to fight themselves out of that hole that they had just dug, only to give it away.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, right, just where Virginia Tech is as a program right now, with the guys that you're going to have in that room, like obviously Tech has a ton of really good football players, but you can't just like roll the helmet onto the field and expect to win, right? Like the best programs are the ones who the staff, and it starts at the top. The best programs aren't caught off guard.
Nope.
And this team was evidently, to their own admission, and in what is clear for anyone that watched the game, they had no idea what was coming at them.
Yeah.
Yep.
And to all the points that Mike made earlier, yeah, you give a team 9 months to prepare for you. They're going to throw some stuff at you that you're not expecting. But to take like 3 quarters to adjust the fact that Diego Pavia is like
too
a
slow
guy.
Too slow. I mean, that's
yeah.
that's inexcusable. That part's inexcusable. Yeah.
It's like, what are we doing? Like, and I think that really to the point that to the extent that we did allow ourselves a scenario when we were prognosticating this game ahead of time, to think like, okay, like what could be the scenario where Tech loses? I think we might have spelled it out exactly correctly, which is Pavia gets going with his legs, and there's a turnover here or there. And,
I mean,
and that's the game.
Ricky definitely did. Ricky definitely did on Twitter. Yeah.
I put it on X. Tech needed to do 3 things in this game. They needed to take care of the football, needed to contain Pavia as a runner, and they needed to avoid special teams miscues. Well, they turned it over in the first quarter and led to a quick Vanderbilt score. They let Pavia run all over them, especially in the first quarter and the fourth quarter. And they gave Vanderbilt a free 3 points on a field goal attempt, which to me, that's the most inexcusable part of all of this.
Yeah.
That no one on the field is able to point out that you have 2 guys on the field wearing the same number.
Yeah.
I don't know how that happens, but all I know is that those guys on the sidelines get paid way too much money for little mistakes like that to be made.
Yeah. Especially when you're the special teams coordinator. Like, a lot of your job is to, understand the nature of the rules and ensure that stuff like that doesn't happen. Like,
yeah.
It's inexcusable. And it adds to a general theme of unpreparedness.
Yeah.
I would chalk that up to like weird like week 1 shit if this staff didn't have a track record of like weird unprepared. Quirky being unprepared, like game management type stuff where it's like, why is it taking us 20 seconds to get the play in? We've seen that, like, hey, why are we committing like multiple false starts?
Remember year 1, the pre-snap penalties?
The pre-snap penalties were horrendous. Like, why are we can't even get lined up right? Like, why are we committing like illegal substitution penalties? Why don't we have enough guys on the line of scrimmage? Why are we committing false starts in home games? Like that kind of stuff, right? And I thought the staff did a pretty nice job of cleaning that up last year. But this one was so egregious, and it legitimately, like, in my opinion, cost Tech the game, right? Yeah. Like, that's a 3 points that ended up being pretty consequential when you consider how this game went to overtime. It can't happen, especially after Vanderbilt gifted you, right, whatever it was, what delay a game or false start, whatever it was, the 5-yard penalty before Tech committed the penalty of their own to put them back into field goal range. And we knew Vanderbilt had a good kicker. He had already made a couple, so you knew he was within field goal range. Just inexcusable, man. really, really bad.
And,
Yeah,
I also would have thought that maybe Ali might have caught that as the punt returner because he's got everything in front of him, including the back of Kelly Lawson, right? And I'm kind of surprised that nobody picked that up, even on the field. I mean, it
yeah,
was completely missed.
yeah. I didn't have to ever deal with like two guys wearing the same number, but I was a punt returner in high school, and I remember like obviously a key job is like catch the ball, don't muff it, right? All that stuff. But pre-snap, right? To your point, Ricky, like pre-snap, one of my jobs was making sure we had 11 guys on the field. That was on me, right? I'm the guy in the back of like I'm all the way, I'm 40 yards back. I'm the guy counting everybody off, and then if we didn't have 11 guys on the field, I either had to scream to the sideline or wave for a timeout, whatever. So I don't know. I know Jennings is tasked with that because that's pretty standard, like making sure you line up with 11. But the dual numbers thing, I think that's dumb to begin with. Like I don't think we should have two guys on the same roster. This is what happens when we have more than 85 players. This is what happens. But
Yep.
I don't think you should have two guys with the same number anyway dressing out. Maybe I'm old school. I think that's really stupid. I don't know why we decided to do that.
It's all to please the players. I mean, guys want more flexibility in the number that they get to pick, and I get that. But when it comes to planning, Stu Holt's job during the week is to say, okay, this is my first team, this is my second team for these units. If someone comes off, I need to know who's going to go on there. And punt returner is pretty important, right? You would think that you would know who your backup returner is. And I guess for some reason Jalen Lane was not available on that return.
Right.
So you're sending out your backup returner out there. You would think that you would have a broader or a more acute sense of awareness of who the guys are in the field at the time. And if you don't, to me, it just shows a lack of attention to detail. And unfortunately, it costs them directly 3 points. And, I don't know that this has ever happened before in college football. It wouldn't shock me if it has. But these are the kinds of little things that should not be happening in year 3. Stu Holt's been around college football for years and should understand how to do this. He doesn't need me on the Hokie Hangover podcast to tell him this is how you make sure you have your lineup right.
Yeah.
This is basic level stuff. And to not have that locked down is really, really discouraging.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say about it other than it was really, really dumb. I couldn't. It was almost mesmerizing how stupid it was. I don't know what other way to put it. I come away concerned about the defense because I was not anticipating. I know we're like 48 minutes into this. There's only so much we can talk about how disappointing this was, but like I was not anticipating Mansour Delane to be that bad. I mean, he was horrendous yesterday. Horrendous. I mean, we can talk about the run fits, which were a problem. Ricky, you brought up. I thought it was, we all watched it, right? It was bad.
But that was something that was an issue last year. So it's not as surprising that it's sticking around. To have someone who's like a preseason conference corner
and to get cooked by Vanderbilt's receivers, who Andrew, by the way, mentioned on the preview pod that Doug Bowman was like digging into Vanderbilt's media stuff, and openly Vanderbilt media people were saying that they didn't have a downfield passing game. And then Mansour Delane, like a preseason all-conference guy, or at least a guy who's going to be in consideration to make an all-conference team at corner, is getting absolutely roasted by these guys. It's just an awful, awful look, man. Just an awful look. And he's going to be facing receivers way, way better than what you saw on Saturday. So that was the part that caught me by surprise. I don't know if he's banged up or if he's hurt or if he just sucked. But like whatever it is, you got to figure that out, because we can talk about the stuff, Ricky, like you just said, that was an issue last year. That like, look, it's unfortunate that Tech's run fits weren't very good, but that was an issue last year. Like, it's unfortunate Virginia Tech's offensive line didn't play great, but like that was an issue last year. It's unfortunate that like Kyron Drones couldn't read the defense consistently, but like that was an issue at times last year. Mansour Delane just like no showing was not an issue Like,
Yeah.
we don't worry about like Dorian Strong and Mansour Delane. We talked all off season about like all of the things we were concerned about. The thing that we were least concerned about that Andrew brought up, it's like we feel pretty good about corner. They're like two of the best 3 or 4 players on the team, and so for one of them to totally no show against a team that has receivers that are just simply not very good is not a great sign, right? And maybe it's a week 1 thing and it ends up being better, but man, that was a rough showing by Delane yesterday.
That was on no one's bingo card. Mansour
Yeah.
Delane forgets how to play football, cooked by former FCS receivers left and right.
Mike, we would have been better if he didn't show up.
It's unfortunate.
The secondary probably would have been better with Dante Lovett or Thomas Williams out there.
I mean, in the most literal sense, he did play lower than replacement level football.
Yeah,
he did.
A mediocre to average replacement, like just purely based on the PFF grades, would have done.
I mean, I got a text message from my buddy Johnny, one of my best friends on the planet, roommate from college. I know he's going to listen to this, so like the shout out. He texted me in the middle of the game. He goes, "Yo, should we pull Delane?" And I was like,
a lot of people were saying that.
Dude, I don't know.
People were asking. People would like to know.
when your backups are Thomas Williams and Dante Lovett, that's a great situation to be in from a depth standpoint. I'm not sure if we feel like we need to use them game 1 if that's a great situation, obviously. So yeah, that's probably my primary concern is like
if they were going to give up. If they were going to give up big passing plays, I would have expected it to happen against the safeties. And it just wasn't it. I mean, I thought Stroman and Jalen Jones and Mose Phillips were fine.
I thought they were fine too.
They didn't overly impact the game from a positive standpoint, but they were not being picked on in this game. The only guy that got picked on in this game was Mansour Delane, and he got picked on a lot, especially early. And every time he got picked on, he gave up big plays.
Mose Phillips seemed like he was around the football a lot, and I don't, maybe I go back and look at it again, and maybe I come away feeling differently about the safeties. But like I had the same thought you did, Ricky. Like I didn't come away thinking safeties were a huge problem, considering how the rest of the defense looked.
Yeah, for me it was Delane. Once again, suspect linebacker play, and then the defensive tackles, in my opinion, just did not do enough up front to get penetration to kind of blow up some of these option plays. It just wasn't enough there. The few times that they got to actually pass rush, I thought they were fine. I mean, Antoine Powell-Ryland looked okay. Cole Nelson looked fine. But in the run game, it seemed like all 4 of those guys, Burgos, it seemed like all 4 of those guys in the run game just did not have a good sense of where they were supposed to be, and they did not hold their gap.
Keep an eye on weak side linebacker too, right? The will position. Like Kelly Lawson got in and played significant snaps, so that's something to monitor too. Because I know he started at least on the initial depth chart with the 2s. Mm-hmm. What do you got, Andrew?
I mean, like overall, almost exactly what you were just saying a few minutes ago, Mike. The issues that were most glaring, with the exception of Delane, are issues that are persistent. From last season. And it's just discouraging that, a lot of our projection was the idea that maybe these issues could be solved, whether
at least improved,
through the transfer portal or through like the nature of off-season development and like how, players are going to get better over time. That's the point of the coaches being there, in part.
That's the whole reason they're there.
That and to manage, things like the rules and number of signs and stuff like that. But no evidence, not a ounce of evidence from that game that any of those are heading in a better direction. In many cases, notably along the trenches, issues looked worse. Again, that's like, I don't want anyone walking away from this podcast thinking that I am like totally like selling on Virginia Tech and that I think we have like a 4 or 5 win ceiling or something like that. Like, no, I do think this team, for all the reasons that we talked about beforehand, has a chance to win a lot of football games. But as I said in our full season preview, for the first time in my, or not in my life, I would say, but in recent history, certainly like in my post-college at Virginia Tech era,
Yeah.
I thought this had an opportunity to be a really like a great team. Like, I didn't rule out winning out, which I would never have thought that Virginia Tech could win out in a season. That there was even a remote chance. I thought that there was, probably roughly almost a 50-50 shot of 10 wins. I felt good about 9 wins. Maybe that was around 50-52. I don't know. I didn't see much of a floor. And the reality is that, the team could still be very good, but great teams don't do what we just saw. Great teams don't come out looking surprised. Great coaching staffs don't allow for those. You probably saw a lot of stuff from Nick Saban. Nick Saban had bad teams. Nick Saban had obviously great teams. When I say bad teams, I mean like 1 year at Alabama. But you never saw Nick Saban's teams making stupid mistakes like that. You don't see Kirby Smart or really even, Dabo roll out with stuff like that. And it's not, sometimes Texas is not going to have the talent. If we went out and played Georgia on any given day, we're going to get steamrolled. But the job of the coaching staff is to take what you're given and make the most out of it with another group of young men on the field and highly paid professional coaches on the sidelines.
Yeah.
Same goal, that you get more out of your guys than they do out of theirs, and that the coaching advantage goes to you, right? And in what you can control in terms of preparing, in terms of scheming, and what have you, that, you give yourself the better chance to win the football game, and Virginia Tech didn't do that.
Yeah.
Clark Lee and his staff came more prepared, and as we've seen Jerry Kill do at many stops, controlled the game in a way that allowed Vanderbilt, who to this day I still believe, and hopefully I'll continue to believe this throughout the rest of the season, Virginia Tech was a far more talented team out there on that field than Vanderbilt. And that's not to diss Vanderbilt, who won the football game.
Yeah.
Credit to them and to their fans. Here's what I will say. I'm sorry, and I'll eat my words. Us laughing at them. You got us.
Right.
No doubt about it. But Virginia Tech had the better team. Vanderbilt's coaching staff won that game for them.
It's a concern.
And credit to them there. And it's the job of this coaching staff who, and though Brett probably never should have admitted it like that, maybe we needed this slap in the face or whatever. Bad optics, but I mean, he knows. He's right.
Right.
Everyone in that room knows what just happened, and no one
right.
in that room went into that game thinking they were going to lose. So
he's right.
It's all good. It doesn't even really matter what jackasses like us have to say. They just need to go in and get it right. The season still has plenty of opportunity, and they still have resources to know, they're not going to the college football playoffs. Sorry, folks. You can start planning your December now. But still plenty of football games left. Still the talent there. Just disappointing. And it eliminates great from really the realm of possibility of what we're looking at this year. And for me, that's disappointing because I did believe.
Ricky, I know you have two things you want to bring up, but one, Virginia Tech is in a situation where, I mean, Andrew, you mentioned this in passing. I just want to reemphasize, the margin for error is small when you're at a school that's not Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, etc. You can overcome having 2 number zeros on the field, whereas Virginia Tech cannot overcome that, right? They don't. It's just you gotta have the coaching edge there. Second of all, Jerry Kill is the greatest mid coach of all time. For the love of Christ, congratulations on the bowl win 2 seasons ago at New Mexico State. God love you. Good for you. Congrats on all the mediocre teams at Minnesota and for helping Fuente try to save his job. No disrespect, but he's the greatest mid coach of all time. I'm so sick and tired of talking about Jerry Kill. For the love of God, man. It's like the ghost of Christmas past. Ricky, you said you have 2 things you want to bring up. We have a question from James Copeland, which that he tweeted at us. I want to make sure we touch on. I know we had people have been really awesome in the chat tonight. I'm not ignoring you all. I'm reading a lot of them, and it's just either one-upping stuff we said or I think we've covered a lot of the questions in there.
Hey, for the people in the chat,
Rick,
though, by the way, for the people in the chat, what you should do, because it looks like you guys are having fun. We're having fun here with you. Do the little notification thing. Not only subscribe to the channel, do the notification thing. Because if there's one thing about us, we're going to be super inconsistent and random about what time we're doing this. And we're even going to be late to the time that we actually say. So if you put on the notification thing, you'll know that no matter what us 3 idiots are getting into that's causing us to be pushed back 15, 20, 30 minutes, boom, it's right there. Notification on your phone. You can join us. You can be part of the conversation because we love having you guys here. And I'm just really glad that we're doing this stuff live now.
That's a great point. Rick?
Yeah, Andrew absolutely nailed it. So the 2 things I want to bring up are related. And I said this to you guys yesterday, and I said we definitely need to talk about this. It was a tweet from Grayson Wimbish, which was essentially a photo of the extremely large contingent of Virginia Tech fans that traveled to Nashville, tore Broadway down, and then showed up to the game and took over the stadium. First of all, kudos, right? Like, this is one of the cool parts about being a Virginia Tech fan is that the fan base does travel to road games. They do it quite consistently, and that's terrific. The main crux of this is that this fan base really deserves something better than what we saw on Saturday. Like, the fans should not have been rewarded with their flights, their drives, all the money they spent to boost Nashville tourism with that mid performance. Like, fans have every right to be irritated and frustrated and upset with how that game went and with what seems like the direction of the program after this game. And this leads me to my next point, which 2 former players who I will name because they put themselves out there, Trey Turner and Taiwan Garbett.
Been waiting for this.
Yeah. These 2 guys have been lamenting the fact that fans are furious. Tough shit, guys. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm very appreciative of both of those guys and what they did for this program. Taiwan Garbett fought through a lot of injuries, grinded his way to a very respectable career at Virginia Tech. Trey Turner was essentially our number 1 receiver for almost his entire career. Those guys deserve all their flowers, and I'm very thankful for what they did. You do not have to defend this. You don't have to defend what we just saw on Saturday. It's okay. Like, you can be mad too. And I find something really frustrating about former players and some of these, maroon and orange colored glasses fans that just refuse to call out BS when we see it. And if there's anything that you know about this podcast and me specifically, I'm not afraid to call out BS when I see it. And I think this podcast has been one of the few that have consistently done this throughout the 6 years now that we've been doing this show. And fans have every right to be upset after performances like this. So if you're one of those fans where you're frustrated, go ahead, let it out. It's fine. Like, you can be a human and feel human emotions about something that you really care about, which is Virginia Tech and Virginia Tech football. And if you've got fans or donors or former players that are tweeting at you saying you're not a real fan or telling you to shut up and you don't support the team, just ignore it. You're entirely within your right to feel the way that you feel after shit like that.
Well, I mean, like, also, the team's got to be extremely disappointed in their performance. I mean, they 100% have to be. Like, any justification for what happened is, I mean, you'd have to be delusional to try to take anything positive away from that. I mean, other than the fact the team showed a little bit of fight and came back, I'm like, yeah, like, we've covered it all. But it's not an acceptable performance. You lost the game that you were a 14-point favorite in. You disappoint in what was effectively a home away game, right? Like,
Yeah.
On the ground, I've heard about 80% Tech. Yeah, I mean, it was a bust in every sense of the word. Now, if you're out here, attacking players on a personal level, I don't need to teach you how to be a good person. It's one of those eye test things. If if you're doing it, you'll know you're doing it. What
Be
I'm
a
telling
human
you
being.
not to do here.
Yeah, be a human being.
Be an actual human being. Have some empathy. No personal attacks. But we can call a spade a spade. That was horrible. No one needs to defend it. If you want to be as nice as possible to the situation, probably just don't say anything. Or, you can be a fan that does coach speak and just talk about the reality of the situation that they have to move past from it, learn from it. There's 11 more games left on the schedule.
I'm so sick of seeing that.
I know, but I mean, there is truth to that, Ricky. But
we don't have to say it. We all know this. Yes, Virginia Tech's got to go 1-0 next week. We all know this. It's not. There's no insight there.
Like hashtag.
You're not adding anything to the conversation. You're not adding anything to the conversation.
It's a long season,
Yeah.
It's like no kidding. We just lost to Vanderbilt, man. Like, let people be mad. Let people be mad about that.
It's have a 12-game season. It's not.
You know where this reaction would be totally fine, and this was something I brought up before the year started. If Virginia Tech makes the college football playoff and loses in the first round, and people are just losing their ever-loving minds, perfectly reasonable to tell those people to shut the hell up.
Yeah.
Like if you make the playoff and you lose in round one, hey, I'm okay. I can live with that.
If we lose by 2 to Miami, I'll tell some people to shut up. Right in that situation, we lost to Vanderbilt. We were talking about making the college football playoff and then went out and lost to Vanderbilt. People don't even know, people probably are in delirium right now. I certainly was. Again, it was one of the truly, and the thought that came to my head when I was watching this game, right? I'm at the wedding, so I'm with a lot of my buddies, a lot of my friends, are fans of this podcast, diehard Virginia Tech football, experiencing it the same way that I am. I have other friends, they're sane, and football actually isn't like their number one priority in life.
That's unfortunate.
Either way, I am, throughout the course of this game, not being the social butterfly that I should be, and spending time with people who I really do love that I don't get to see that often, because I'm letting a football game ruin my afternoon on the day of one of my best friend's wedding. And I'm like, why do I allow this to happen to myself? But it truly was one of the most jarring disappointments that I felt on a personal level, just because I care about this university. I just, it's what I like. Everyone's got their hobby.
I've been telling my friends for months, Virginia Tech might be back this year. They might be back. Now, how do I look now?
Yeah,
you look fine, because they always do this. This is what they do. They do it when they're good. They do it when they're bad. They always do this. So if you want to if you want to be optimistic, if you want to take the optimistic side of this, back in the 2010-11 season, they opened up the year with a loss to Boise. They lost to James Madison. Then they won 10 in a row, went to the ACC title game, went to an Orange Bowl. If you want to take the optimistic side of it, that's the blueprint, right? They do this when they're good. They do this when they're bad. They do this when they're mediocre. They no-show, right? I think where I need to personally readjust expectations. I said 9-3. I never thought this was a playoff team. I flat out didn't. I thought, just from a talent standpoint, Clemson and Miami were better, and I knew Virginia Tech would do this. I knew they would do that. I knew they would go out and lay an egg. I didn't know they'd do it in the opener against Vanderbilt, who I have openly said is the worst non-conference team on the schedule. People are going to disagree with me, say ODU. Go put on the tape of the ODU South Carolina game, and you tell me who the worst team is.
Seriously.
I whatever. We can quibble about that if we want to. I frankly don't give a shit.
Are people not concerned about that game coming up?
It should have Virginia Tech's full attention, right?
Yes.
I mean, it should have Virginia Tech's full attention.
Evidently, we should not be looking past anyone.
Yeah,
right. Go figure.
Certainly not Marshall at home.
I mean, I said 9-3. I said on this podcast Virginia Tech would lose to Clemson and Miami. I still think that if they're going to lose to both of those teams, because if you can't block Vanderbilt, you're not going to be able to block Clemson. You're not going to be able to block Miami, flat out. Clemson's defense actually played Clemson's defense played pretty well yesterday, even though it was 34-3. They played pretty well. I not going to be able to block them, so don't worry about it. Don't worry about Miami. You're not going to be able to block them either. I figured they would lose one other team, right? That's why I thought they dropped one.
Rutgers?
They shouldn't. And like I said on the preview, thought it could be Rutgers, could be Georgia Tech. So from that standpoint, you readjust expectations because you thought you were going to win the Vanderbilt game. Now those teams are still in front of you that I had concerns about. So maybe this is 8-4. Maybe this is 7-5. Maybe it's still 9-3. Maybe it's 10-2. I doubt it because that would mean they have to split Clemson and Miami. I would doubt it. Goals are still in front of you. I disagree. I'm seeing a 7-5 is likely the ceiling. I'm not sure I agree. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that's. I'm not sure I agree. This is very week to week. This is a week to week team, guys. Like if we get the best of Virginia Tech, I mean we've seen the best of Virginia Tech. We've seen the worst of this program. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, like
I don't want to overreact.
Again, great teams don't drop games like that. Facts. Seeing that game doesn't give you faith that they're going to be able to go out there and run the table in the games outside of the two where they're likely to be significant underdogs.
Yeah.
Like Oregon goes out on Saturday, plays a very ugly game, barely squeaks past essentially the Idaho Vandals.
Outgained them by like 300 yards and beat them by what was it, 10?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like obviously that's probably an anomaly. Like I'm not selling Oregon as a national brand team this year. I think that they have a very good chance to make the playoff. It was one game. It was the first game. Things can be weird. But the fact that the issues in this game were essentially the greatest hits album of the problems we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
It's just not super encouraging when we're doing things like talking about beating Clemson as something that needs to happen, about when we're letting Diego Pavia and a team who supposedly was not able to complete a pass of more than 15 yards in fall camp all year in front of the media, and you're letting him dice the team up. We have potentially injury issues at safety, and the best quarterbacks this team will see all year are really, and I mean no offense to Diego Pavia, but the majority of the better quarterbacks are still ahead of us. That's not a top three quarterback that Virginia Tech's seeing on their schedule. Time will tell by the end of the year, and maybe I could be wrong, and maybe Vanderbilt does go win 5 games. I think that they're looking good on their 2.5 over/under on the year now.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah, I would say so. Yep.
But the greater challenges are ahead of this team. They had an opportunity and they laid an egg, and it's going to be hard for me to talk myself into the idea that despite the talent on this team, there isn't another egg to be laid as the competition gets harder throughout the year. So
Andrew accidentally muted himself.
When we're talking
week 1 for us too.
Yeah, when we're talking about 8 wins, 9
too.
wins, those are the assumptions that we have to make, right? And first test failed. Not saying they can't come back. The Military Bowl thing last year at 1-3 or 1-4.
Oh, gosh.
That was a joke. We didn't think we were going to make it to a bowl game. We thought it was, at that point, given a larger sample size, right, 4 games, the idea that Tech could go and finish the season, 5-3 in the conference, coming effectively 3rd place. That was a joke. It is a long season. There are a lot of data points. You can improve. All of this stuff can be true. You know what else is true? They just lost as 14-point favorites at Vanderbilt.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's something that happened. And no matter how much you want to talk yourself in circles around it. That is a fact of life that can never go away. Virginia Tech still has not beaten a Power 5 non-conference opponent outside of Lane Stadium since West Virginia at
Yeah,
FedEx
that's not
Field,
great. That's not great.
2017.
That was a long time
Tech's
ago.
notes 7 years ago.
That's not great.
Yeah.
I just want to note, we can. I think Marshall and Old Dominion and Rutgers and I think all these teams need to have Virginia Tech's full attention. Obviously, ODU looked pretty competitive against South Carolina yesterday. They also had an entire offseason to prepare. Week 1's weird.
South Carolina also sucks.
South Carolina also sucks. Week 1 is weird, right? Like week 1's weird. I think what we've brought up as concerns on this podcast, I think, are justified, regardless of if this happened in week 1 or week 8. Like the stuff we saw yesterday was a lot of Virginia Tech beating themselves, right? Which made things really, really frustrating. I think it's fair for us to be concerned. I don't think we're overreacting. I think we've had a pretty fair, down the middle conversation on this podcast for an hour and 16 minutes so far. The one thing I want to hit on before we get out of here, we'll be back later this week to obviously preview Marshall. I want to get to this question from James Copeland, who said he couldn't join tonight, and he's been an OG, like, loyal listener for a really long time. I really want to make sure we get to this question.
Mount Rushmore listener.
He's a Mount Rushmore. He's a Mount Rushmore listener, so I really want to make sure we get to this and I don't forget about it. So we're just going to get to this right now before we get out of here. James Copeland said, "Hey, can't join tonight. Question for the crew: what lie or hype from the off season did you get caught up in the most?" Because I mean, we've talked all night about how we were really optimistic, and it's really disappointing. His was the defensive line. He said it was a crazy lack of control up front yesterday, which I think we've addressed that point at length tonight. The defensive line struggled, especially against the run. I mean, what unit was it for you guys? Or maybe it wasn't even like a unit. Like what portion of like the off-season hype or optimism going into this week 1 game against Vanderbilt did you guys get caught up in the most? I think I have one. I think I have one. So
I think for me, it may end up being the same for all of us. It's the fact that returning production means anything. I mean, that was the sole basis for all of this optimism and hope surrounding this program.
Yeah. And
when your returning production went 7-6 last year, how much can you project from that? If week 1 is any indication, it's very little. So Virginia Tech did, in fact, bring most of their offense back from last year. They brought back most of their defense from last year, and it doesn't seem to have helped a damn thing. So I don't know if they're just off, and maybe these guys really flip the switch next week, and next thing you know, they start to be the players that we thought they could be. But, after week 1, it sure looks like returning production doesn't really mean anything.
I mean, mine's more of just like overarching and emotional piece of hype. It's the idea that this program had really turned a corner where we weren't going to see stuff like that anymore. That we weren't going to come out in week 1 and lay that egg against a bottom dweller. Really, as far as college football goes, I mean, and again, no offense to Vanderbilt, who, to their credit, they go to work every day and they're trying. And for a program that does not have much going for it, they deserve whatever fruits come with that victory, right? But Tech was the better team. I thought this coaching staff had turned a corner from what we've seen with Virginia Tech over the course of the last decade. Yeah. That, we were on our way back, and it was just a matter of – and the reason I thought that, right, is because Tech, from the moment that the offensive tweaks were made last year, every team that wasn't clearly a step ahead of them – they absolutely freaking pummeled. So I'm like, okay, that's how things are now. Evidently not. So to see that as clear as day was very disappointing. And again, which is why I'm saying my personal promise to everyone else on this podcast, or all our listeners, and to you guys, my esteemed co-hosts here, I am not overlooking an opponent on this schedule. I will think really hard about ways that this team could lose to Marshall next week. Could lose to ODU 2 weeks down the line. And I guess those are the only things that you can even really consider to be a layup at this point, if such a thing exists, when we're missing layups in dramatic fashion as we did this past Saturday. But yeah, knowing that disappointment is always a possibility is, it hits home a little bit.
Yeah, mine's very similar to yours, Andrew. Mine was just the coaching. I thought the coaching staff had turned a corner, right? The second half of last year, I thought that the way Virginia Tech lost games against Florida State, Louisville. I know we disagreed on this a little bit, so I don't want to bring back. We don't need to reopen this argument on this show tonight.
You don't want to bring back, but you have to feel worse.
But you have to feel worse. But I thought in the games against Florida State, Louisville, and NC State last year, I thought it was more about a talent issue, if not across the roster, maybe in the Florida State or Louisville games, more position by position in the NC State game.
Problems that you'd expect to have in year two.
Problems that you'd expect to have in year two, and areas of the roster for Virginia Tech where I looked at and I was got to get better in that part of the roster, right? Got to get better at that position group, this position group. But I thought the coaching had turned a corner. I think it's safe to say yesterday, and we've nailed this at length, Virginia Tech got out coached yesterday, right? So I think that's probably the area where I maybe bought into too much optimism, just because I thought we were starting to get more data points heading in that direction, dating back to end of September last year, where I'm coaching staff is really starting to get things together on both sides of the ball. And it didn't always look pretty against better competition, but against teams that we thought Virginia Tech should beat, they did. So this we're kind of back, as Ricky eloquently put at the beginning of the podcast. This was a September-esque performance from last season, which is not somewhere Virginia Tech. Those are waters Virginia Tech does not want to be swimming in.
Nope.
So
that was a September 2019 performance, my friend. That was Tim Thomas having a heart attack in the press box because Tech's losing to Furman at halftime. That's what we were looking at.
Surrender Cobra in the press box. Paul couldn't believe his eyes.
Dear God.
Gracious.
Nick Saban said something on College Game Day. Well, I think this is a good way to close. Nick Saban said something on College Game Day yesterday where I guess Herb Street was asking, they were talking about Alabama in the segment and how Alabama kind of turned their season around offensively after a dud against South Florida where they won the game but didn't play very well. And Saban said that players have a lot of pride and they respond well to adversity in terms of playing poorly and winning and playing poorly and losing. They usually respond really well the next week. Obviously, Virginia Tech's going to have to do that, and hopefully they don't need to be reminded again against teams not named Miami and Clemson, where Virginia Tech is going to be a team that on the field should be able to compete against the rest of the schedule, right? Hopefully they don't need to be reminded again with a loss, right, to wake up and play well the following week. So hopefully they can start stringing together wins here.
I'll tell you this. Number one, I will be at the Marshall game. So, flying someone in from across the country, buddy of mine, for my job, showing him college football, getting him all excited about it. I'm oh, yeah, by the way, we kind of just lost to Vanderbilt. I don't know about that, but on the bright side, much higher stakes in the Marshall game. I got myself a little emotionally prepared today and subjected one of my other friends with whom I was watching the LSU USC game, which we got on this podcast. I have no idea how that game concluded.
Oh, I have it on. I had it on right here, and I will not spoil it for you.
Okay. Yeah.
Don't look at the timeline.
We are not going to be looking at the timeline. I've been
look at
very
the timeline.
dialed in with you guys, but while we were waiting for that game to start, I tried to channel some good energy. I played Marshall Virginia Tech 2019 Army Navy Week game on the television. So we're channeling that positive energy, not the energy from 2023 Marshall. That is the opposite of the energy that we need right now. But it should be a good week. And to our listeners, again, subscribe here. I again, in my optimism, I was a little worried. I'm like, this podcast might get a little boring if we're just like rolling everyone. Like, no boredom on the Hokie Hangover podcast this year. Just
unfortunately, we do our best work when the team stinks. I think that's.
The team's never been good enough that we would know what it would be like if that was the case. But I think we
fair enough.
The best seasons for the Hokie Hangover podcast in terms of content. This program has been so interesting that it's always been pretty good. Like,
there's always been a lot to talk about.
Never a dull moment, when I can't even get into it right now. Either way, folks, subscribe to the pod, and thanks for listening. And shout out to Hugh Caperton, father of the bride. This weekend, I had met him. He was like, "Oh, Andrew Alec from the Hokie Hangover podcast." I'm like, Hugh Caperton, like Preston's dad. Nice to meet you, man. Like, all good.
Shout out Hugh, man.
To Hugh, a guy who is a diehard Hokie fan, but very much in enemy territory, living in the great state of West Virginia. So, thank you for your service.
I've got one more thing beyond please continuing to subscribe on whatever app you use to listen. If you talked shit to Jalen Merricks on Twitter, then you better go apologize. That's all I'm going to say. That boy had y'all cooked. He called it. Give him his flowers. Just saying. He caught a lot of flack.
Alluded to it.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was saying Vanderbilt fans, I just meant that one guy because I don't know how many other fans they have.
Yeah, judging by the game, they have about maybe 30.
I mean, they have a podcast. It clearly has some support. They have like 10,000 followers or something on Twitter. One of their guys called a Vandy win. I think his analysis was like, I don't know how, but I got to believe, right? I got to pick this. Good for that guy. Congratulations to Vanderbilt fans. However many of you may exist. Good for you.
Love the backhanded compliment there.
Welcome to.
Yep.
For us, it's like, well, here we go again. 2024 Virginia Tech season just got a whole lot more spicy, if you will.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we have as many viewers and listeners and people in the comments on the preview as we did here in the recap. Shout out to everybody in the comments. I know we got everybody on Sunday night, the night before a holiday. So I know and people are fired up about this loss. So I appreciate everybody jumping in here. I know we juiced the live viewers quite a bit by going the night before everybody's off work, recording as late as we did. So shout out to everybody who's still watching, hanging with us now after midnight Eastern time. Really appreciate it. We're going to end the stream now. We'll be back later this week to preview Marshall. Maybe we'll do it live again. It seems like it was well received, so maybe we'll just go ahead and fire from the hip and do it live again. We appreciate you all. Rate, review, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Really trying to grow that. This will be like the 12th or 13th video on there. It's pretty new, so go check out the YouTube page. Go subscribe to that. And, we'll talk later this week. Go Hokies.